Wow. Congratulations on making it through 2021, or as I call it, 2022. Despite overwhelming everything, the year turned out to be a strong one in the world of video games. Many times throughout 2021, a game released that felt to me like the apex of that year, and then another game came out, and then another. Honestly, at this point, I can't at all point to a single game of the year. Not that I'm one to do so normally, but it's a fun conversation. Instead, I want to comb through the many highlights of the video game year to distract from the lowlights of the real-life year. I'm writing this late October to get ahead of myself, but maybe something will come out in the next 2 months that makes me rethink things further? I don't know. Who knows? I don't. I actually forgot Hitman 3 came out this year. I wrote almost my entire script before thinking about 47's wacky adventures and googled the release date. Oops. Hitman 3 is the conclusion of the World of Assassination trilogy, probably the last we'll see of 47 for a while. I think that, with all 3 World of Assassination games in one package, Hitman 3 is the best stealth game ever made. It's a trilogy of tense puzzles as you observe the city around you, and slowly break your way in like a tumble lock on a puzzle box. Each level is massive, with secret passages to traverse and stories to uncover. They feel realized, maybe not actual physical spaces, but close enough to be real while retaining the hallmarks of a skilled level designer. Each building, each room, is its own miniature encounter, each target an untouchable god befitting of their status and wealth. That is, until you break through and hit them when they least expect it. Hitman 3 mixes up the formula with Berlin, a sort of social deduction twist, and Dartmoor, a murder mystery that is phenomenal at being exactly that, but maybe not the most interesting level for traditional man-hitting. Hitman World of Assassination's biggest strength, however, other than the sheer size and scope of each individual level, is that it can be played in many different flavors. You can go full stealth, no disguises, funny disguises, snipers, Easter egg hunting, or even the oft-ignored digital tourism. It's 7 stealth games in one, which for a total of 3 individual Hitman games makes it 21 stealth games in one. Double that for the non-stealth variants of each level, add in a few of the sniper-only levels, photo mode, the content creation suite being a glorified fanfiction platform, and add the little Easter egg mysteries in every level, and you get... wow. The second major release of the year for me was the sequel to my favorite game of all time, The World Ends With You. Neo, The World Ends With You, was announced like a missile launch after a drought of TWEWY news, after a much larger drought of TWEWY silence. I tried to limit my expectations and was surprised. The game didn't have the same cohesion as the original. The Zodiac framing device that painted every character and brand of the game faded out for a new veneer of modern fashion. For example, Sheep Heavenly Sheep have moved to Shepherd House, a more skater-inspired outfitter. They have bucket hats, which I've been told are in. The soundtrack remixes old classics and debuts new singles, with a startling amount of emo and nu metal type rock beats. Character designs too reflect current fashion, like the main character's fashionable face mask. His preferred method of wearing it does not reflect well in 2021. Neo TWEWY's vibes are as fresh as ever, the music and graphic design painting an even more dynamic Shibuya than before, maybe literally with its twisting skylines. The combat is vastly different from the DS title. Since there is only one screen, there's no simultaneous parallel battles. Instead, the ARPG format became a 3D character action game style. While at first I wasn't sure how to avoid taking damage, I realized that holding attack buttons constantly wasn't the intended gameplay style. Instead, characters switch in and out with the frequency of Pokemon singles, turning the puck-passing gimmick of the original into a more visually clear tag mechanic. The story, on the other hand, is a story directly made to compare to the original. Sure, the friendly, familiar faces are few and far between, but the rules of the game within a game set off alarms in my head. The Reaper's game of TWEWY 1 was one that secretly rewarded teamwork. If one team cleared the mission, every team did. This actually becomes relevant at some point in the plot. In Neo, the game always has one loser team that must die. Boss fights can only be challenged one at a time. Also, Minamimoto is helping you. Weird. These alarms wouldn't have popped up for someone with solid knowledge of the original's plot and world. They unfold into a clear message that Shibuya has changed, will change, and will only change for the better when people don't exploit others. Shiba only wanted to further himself for selfish means, as opposed to the more noble expression and liberation of Hanakoma. His burnout is one we've seen before from similarly Icarus-like villains. The end of the plot might have been a little convoluted, but it did have a cool Phoenix fight, Shiba's fire turning into the rebirth of Shibuya. It almost feels like upping the stakes from Twiwi, the original, was a structurally unsound ramp, one that was guaranteed to break apart from the force of a solid 720. Maybe a reborn Shibuya that could grow its own direction was what the developers wanted to make rather than a continued flame passed from the torch of the original. Also, there's an influencer boss fight that crowdfunds his attacks, and we get to see Shiki's face after the anime had her walk backwards just to hide it. Psychonauts 2 finally released after years of post-Kickstarter development. Psychonauts 1 is fine, though it's maybe not quite tightly designed as its contemporaries. Many platforming challenges can be almost circumvented completely with Levitation Ball. Fights often have simple cheese strategies, and a few psi powers have one or two set uses, without much room for creativity. It leaves the game feeling more like a platformer made by adventure game designers than platformer designers, which... In Psychonauts 2, platforming is balanced around levitation first, with wider gaps between jumps or higher verticality implemented during more tricky obstacles. Enemies are more diverse with multiple weaknesses and attack patterns, each encouraging different strategies that, in turn, encourage swapping between many different psi powers, depending on the given situation. Clairvoyance is utilized to give you some items here and there, but is still largely a vehicle for Easter eggs and character details. Less excusable than Psychonauts 1's platforming or combat, some writing aspects of the original don't exactly hold up in the current year. Mainly the whole arrowhead thing, but also how it treats mental disability. Psychonauts 1 seems to take an approach that Raz can cure someone completely by going in and fighting a boss. Psychonauts 2 gets rid of the arrowheads, and takes a much more careful touch on its main subject matter. Psychonauts 2 is less about removing disability, and more about finding healthy coping mechanisms. Hollis Hot Streak handles gambling addiction by encouraging mindful thought and looking to others for support. Bob's Bottles encourages an alcoholic to find a support network by helping him feel comfortable about planting roots. It's a lot closer to therapy than the original, speaking as someone who's been in therapy but never been a therapist. This is backed by some incredible environmental storytelling and design. Psychonauts 1 was, and still is, lauded for its level themes that portray the NPC's mental states, but many of its levels can feel summarized in one sentence. Gloria has a theater that rotates between comedy and tragedy. Sasha keeps his problems locked in a box to match his stoic demeanor, and gets distraught when it opens. Fred plays a board game. Psychonauts 2's levels are much more similar to Black Velvetopia, the level that's maybe the best at slowly unfolding its patient's past over time. The individual scenes in Hollis Hot Streak are just as much about her experience being taken advantage of as a medical intern as they are about gambling. Compton's animal telepathy turns into sensory overload from animals being slaughtered and cooked, into then an immense pressure he feels from the other Psychonauts. I won't even spoil Bob's Bottles even further, maybe my favorite level in the game. In the end, Psychonauts 2 is much more about tackling loss, grief, and the after effects those can have without proper care and support. Raz takes a more therapeutic role than before, which ends up feeling both realistic and almost more heartwarming. I do enjoy Arcane Studios' outings quite a bit, though I never finished Dishonored 2 due to the overwhelming presence of blood flies. Just a little too realistic for me. I wasn't sure what to make of Deathloop beforehand, and I'm honestly not sure what to make of it now. It encourages stealthy gameplay, but has some great frantic firefights, both backed by bananas good gunplay. It weaves in some nifty puzzles and adventure game-esque quest designs, while flaunting Arcane's level design chops. The 4 main locales of Blackreef are fleshed out and lived in, and I still haven't uncovered every mystery in the game. That being said, the time loop mechanics feels awkward both in gameplay and in story. The loop is used to perpetually maintain the lives of everyone involved, with the visionaries taking that gift and exploiting it for research or pleasure. Some use the pseudo-immortality to explore artistic pursuits. Some just want to party. But the game makes it clear that Colt and Juliana are the only ones who remember each loop's events. That's why everyone else follows the exact same pattern and routine, and why every other visionary is content to get assassinated at the same bat time and channel. But if they can't remember, why did they set the loop up in the first place? Did they think they would be aware? Why is Wenji the only other character with time clones, and how are her clones not chronologically lucid as well? If these are answered, then I couldn't find those answers. Instead, I just kept thinking about how the rules for the loop are functional as game mechanics, but seem to just erode at the pillar of the plot. But that didn't matter too much at the time, as I was focused on finding that final loop. Most time loop fiction is structured to build into a cathartic final loop, one that combines everything the character has learned or done, one that tests the character's ingenuity and understanding of their world. From the start, it was clear that I'd have to kill all the visionaries in one loop. It seemed like I could make a schedule of their actions and plan out a route according to how I wanted to engage with them, but it soon seemed that several visionaries would only be in one place at one time, or my only opportunity to catch them would be with the help of some accident. When I gathered all my clues and prepared myself, the game outright told me I was ready to make the loop leap. When I began the loop, it told me where to go, what to do, and how to kill. I think games like Outer Wilds and Hitman spoil me. Outer Wilds was a game with no handholding, one that only implied when and how you could break the loop. Hitman is a series built on flexible kills, where accidents and sabotage are as plentiful as bullets in a gun. Both of those games stress freedom more as a core principle, that the player can be trusted to do what they want, and to find a solution that works for themselves. Dishonored even packed a few options for each target. Deathloop, on the other hand, feels like a puzzle with a specific solution and a walkthrough that's always open. The night before my final stream, I wrote down the order I was going to visit each district and what my goals were. The day of, I was proven correct on every front, not by executing the plan, but by the UI telling me to do so. Maybe time loop games seem so prominent in 2021 because we, too, are living in a time loop. The removal and distancing of public spaces leave us to confront the monotony in our lives. I personally crave variety, but I can never seem to push myself into anything different. The reduced contact with others to bounce thoughts and decisions off ends up pulling myself into a whirlpool in which every day looks the same. I eat the same food, I play the same games, I follow a schedule with nothing planned. Heck, almost every game I've talked about in this video is a sequel to something from long ago, something I loved, and all I can do is compare the new and old like I'm deciding on which microwave calzone to buy at the grocery store. As I write this, the biggest movie release is the remake of Dune. You know, Dune. Maybe I just need some spice, some variety, some... If I'm gonna play a sequel to something, why not play a sequel to every card game ever made? Inscryption is a beautiful tribute to card games, given that signature Daniel Mullins flair. It begins as a seemingly innocuous, albeit atmospheric deck builder roguelite. However, your opponent seems to hint at a dark fate if you lose. If you do lose, you get the opportunity to stand up and move. This puts you into what seems like an escape room, but in reality the puzzles are more like duel puzzles in a Yu-Gi-Oh game, either testing your understanding of combat mechanics, or challenging you to make a specific board state. The game continues and whispers of other captives and lost souls echo between the cards as the captor pushes you onward, and then you fight the moon. And then the game keeps going. Inscryption's story follows a TCG YouTuber who came into possession of a prototype for a digital card game adaptation. His mostly authentic demeanor and set are interrupted by correspondences from the card game's developers that seem to try and cover up a dark mystery. The video game resumes, now in a form reminiscent of the Pokemon TCG Game Boy game. The bloody sacrifices of before are only one faction of 4, bones that recycle the dead, energy that charges up over time, and magic artifacts that power spells. But wait, those artifacts are called mocks. Does that sound familiar? Inscryption is as much a meta-horror experience as it is a love letter to card games. Blood costs act like Yu-Gi-Oh sacrifices. Energy builds every turn, and is blue, like Hearthstone, and mocks provide colors of mana much like magic. Each resource seems caught between synergy and isolation. Specializing in one of the 4 factions could be good, but it seems like they only improve when mixing more card types into the soup. When you try and claim your spot as one of the 4 elites, the rug gets pulled from underneath. You're kicked back out into a factory, the factory from before. You play a new game, one with corpse runs akin to an RPG or Soulsborne game, one without permadeath. One that tasks you, the player, with designing some of its cards. This also comes filled with more meta horror and comedy, playing off your hard drive and Steam friends. Through this all, though, it's hard to ignore the lack of bones and blood, and the gems only slightly resemble their former self. The world might be more thematically fixed, but its mechanics seem lacking. This all climaxes when PO3 tries uploading itself to the internet, spreading itself virally. The only way to stop it is to delete the game's files. Well, not really, but the player is given one final chance to challenge each elite, tasting a slice of their unique dungeons. In a twist of comedic brilliance, the Magic Painter whips out a pair of dual-disc systems. However, each opponent offers to shake your hand, a sign of respect that simply signifies good game. I think Inscryption's ending, that world falls apart tearjerker, is sort of a shift from the rest of the game, but really signifies what I love about competitive games. You can fight a heated battle against a rival, or lose to a powerful foe, yet in the end everyone can step aside and respect each other, remembering that the game does not have to bleed into real life. Games are often a form of escapism, and not necessarily in a negative way. Entertainment can help people manage the stress and anxieties of everyday life, but relatable media can dig into your head and sit with you, reflecting your world in an image that might make everything clearer, easier to parse. If 2021 was a time loop, then I found solace relating my fears of endless tedium with the challenges that Cult faced. If I find myself overflowing with anxiety, maybe I can relate to how Raz helps the Psychonauts through their troubles. And if I'm getting bored or annoyed at games, maybe I just need something really good to remind me of why I like games in the first place.